Well, thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be with you all this evening. It's always great to be in front of a group of the Republican Assembly because it saves us a lot of time. A lot of people in the state think, well, if you just elect Republicans, that's going to solve the problem. People in this room understand Republicans come in a lot of different flavors. And if you want somebody that's committed to reducing the size and scope of government, if you want somebody that's committed to individual freedom, to fewer taxes, to less regulation, you've got to be a little bit more discerning than just seeing that there's an R next to their name. Now, my name is Josh McKoon. I'm running to be your Secretary of State. I'm running for Secretary of State to make Georgia the fastest state in the nation to get a job and the toughest state in the nation to cast an illegal vote. So if you really just boil it down, that's what our campaign platform is all about. Now, I know Paul asked a question earlier about Georgia driver's licenses being issued to illegal aliens. This is an issue that I've been fighting in the General Assembly for years. When we started, we discovered there were roughly 20,000 driver's licenses that have been issued to illegal aliens. Now it's over 48,000. It is entirely unacceptable. I was the author of Senate Bill 6, which originally would have simply prohibited the practice of issuing driver's licenses to illegal aliens. Some decided that was too controversial, so we then tried to compromise and say, well, can we at least give the illegal alien something that is clearly distinguishable from a Georgia driver's license? We passed that out of the Senate, but the State House of Representatives found that a little too controversial. So we're going to be trying again next year to deal with that, but I'm certainly committed to that. I am also committed to English as the official language of state government, something I'll spend a little time talking about later. But what I'd like to do with the time I've got allotted is tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about what I hope to accomplish as Secretary of State, and why I think I'm your best choice in the May 22nd Republican primary. My family moved to Georgia because my great-grandfather had a job opportunity at the Eagle and Phoenix textile mill in Columbus. He worked in that mill for 50 years. My grandfather dropped out of school in the 8th grade during the Great Depression to help take care of our family, worked a lot of odd jobs until World War II broke out. When World War II broke out, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. He fought in the Pacific Theater until the war ended, and then he moved back to Columbus, married my grandmother who worked at commercial printers. He was a milkman, he was a railroad conductor. Eventually, they saved up enough money to open a grocery store in downtown Columbus at 5th Avenue and 8th Street. They had a lot of small businesses over the years, that grocery store for a long time, a gas station, another grocery store. One of my earliest childhood memories is refilling the Coca-Cola machine at their laundromat, which was the last sort of small business that they owned and operated. They're very entrepreneurial people. My dad was the first member of our family to go to college. He went to Auburn University, worked in the same Eagle and Phoenix mill in the summertime to earn tuition. He went on to law school, and he's been a practicing attorney for the last 40 years. And I followed in my dad's footsteps, although I went to the University of Alabama for law school, so that creates some interesting conversation around this time of year with the football season and everything. But I tell you all that to tell you, and I've served in the state senate for the last 7 years, my family's really been able to live out our American dream. We've been able to chart our own course and go after the things that we want. Hunter talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We've been able to pursue those things. But I think for more and more Georgians and Americans, it is becoming more difficult to achieve your American dream. And I believe that a government that has gotten too big and that has gotten in the way is the primary obstacle. In the last 15 years, we've seen Georgia's share of middle-income families decrease. At the same time, we've seen Georgia's share of low-income families increase. And what that's telling me is why Georgia remains a destination for Fortune 500 companies to locate corporate headquarters. For the average person trying to grasp that first rung on the ladder to economic success, things are becoming harder. They're not becoming easier. And so I'm running for Secretary of State, as I said, for 2 reasons: to make Georgia the fastest state in the nation to get a job and the toughest state in the nation to cast an illegal vote. So what do I mean by that? When I say fastest state in the nation to get a job, we have 41 licensed professions in this state. 41 different jobs where you've got to go to the government and ask permission to go to work. 40 years ago, fewer than 1 in 20 Americans had to get a license to go to work. Today, it's more than 1 in 4. Now, I would tell you, we happen to be in a library this evening, and the state licenses librarians. Now, there are public safety and public health reasons to license a lot of professions, but I would submit to you that if we stopped licensing librarians tomorrow, there would be no public health crisis, there would be no public safety crisis. And yet we do that. We do that because someone somewhere decided that we needed that credential to be issued by the government. The private sector can handle that just fine. We don't need to do that. In a lot of these professions, we can make it easier for people to get that license, to get a job, to go to work, to provide for their family, and to be tax-paying, productive citizens. Why would we not want to do that? In this state, on average, a cosmetology license holder spends 350 days in training before they get their license, before they make that first paycheck. By comparison, on average, an EMT license holder, somebody who's going to render life-saving aid in a medical emergency, on average spends 31 days in training. Now, it's hard for me to believe that it should take 10 times the training to cut and color hair and do nails as it does to learn to render life-saving aid. So clearly, we have allowed the government to get in the way of a lot of people that would like to be able to go to work. They'd like the dignity of honest, hard work. So as conservatives, I think the Secretary of State's #1 job is to see how we can get government out of the way and allow people to pursue those dreams and those goals. And we can do that. We can do that with every licensed profession. When it comes to elections, there are a couple of things I could talk about. I could spend a lot of time talking about it, but I'm going to boil it down for you this evening. #1, the machinery of elections, the touchscreen voting machines. Those are going to have to be replaced. They need to be replaced, in my opinion, by a voting solution that involves an auditable paper trail. Now, whether that's an optical scan ballot like what we do for absentee voting now, whether it's an electronic machine that produces a paper record, we can discuss the parameters of that, but we have got to migrate to a solution that has an auditable paper trail. You look at the mayor's race in Atlanta that just was conducted. There is a low degree of public confidence in the outcome of that election because we have a fully electronic system. You can conduct a recount, but all you're really doing is running a computer program again. You're not going to really get a different result. So the public confidence, I believe, is very low, and it's incredibly important that the public have confidence in the outcome of elections in a system where we elect our leaders. When it comes to litigation, we have got to have a Secretary of State who understands that the left has not given up on putting their thumb on the scale when it comes to our elections. They've simply chosen a different battleground. They know they can't win under the Gold Dome, so they try to go to unelected federal judges to rewrite Georgia election law. They did it this summer in the Karen Handel-John Ossoff race. They got 60 additional days to register voters. They're registering people in the middle of an election, 10,000 new voters who were registered in between the April election and the June runoff. That's wrong. And we lost in front of a single federal judge. And what was the state's response? We surrender. We give up. You need a Secretary of State who's going to defend our legal position, the position the General Assembly has taken. That's why there's an 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. That's why there's a United States Supreme Court. I'm not going to allow a single federal judge to overturn the will of 10 million Georgians. I mean, that's why we have that system in place. While I'm on this subject, there were multiple lawsuits filed to require that ballots be printed in languages other than English. Lawsuits filed in Gwinnett and Hall counties last year. That is simply wrong, and people in this race don't even want to talk about this issue because they're afraid of being labeled as a bigot or a hater. But let's be clear about this. When you sit for the United States citizenship examination, you have to demonstrate an ability to understand, read, and write the English language. We believe that's important for all of us to be able to communicate in a common language. And so I'm not going to stand for, as your Secretary of State, this left-wing project to divide us up by requiring ballots being printed in multiple languages. We have seen the Secretary of State's office spend tens of thousands of dollars to provide instructional materials in multiple foreign languages. That's not right. We ought to be fighting back against that, whether that's in state court, whether that's lobbying our congressional delegation. You know, some people in this race say, well, we can't do anything about that because that's a federal issue. And I've been having to remind people, we've elected a Republican president. We have a Republican majority in Congress. Why, oh why, would the Secretary of State not be going to Washington and saying, if there's a problem with federal law, let's fix it? But we should not be allowing unelected federal judges to write our election law, and we certainly shouldn't be standing for having ballots printed in multiple foreign languages. The price that you pay, in my opinion, to participate in our political process is understanding the English language well enough to vote. I don't think that should be a controversial position. As your Secretary of State, I believe that we can and must do better when it comes to the integrity of our electoral process. We talk about voter ID all the time. If you vote in person, you've got to show an ID on Election Day. If you vote early in person, you have to show an ID on Election Day. But if you vote absentee, that protection really goes away completely. We're sort of relying on an honor system. We send in a letter, you get a ballot back, then you send the ballot in. In my home county, in Muskogee County, we had a situation a couple of years ago. A lady showed up at the elections office with 19 unsealed absentee ballots. She started being asked questions about it, and she said, well, you know, I work at a local nursing home, and I was just bringing these in, make sure these votes got counted. Well, they did a little investigation, come to find out 15 of the 19 people involved couldn't sign their name or make their mark. And yet somehow they had requested these ballots and voted these ballots. And here's a spoiler alert for you, they did not vote for Republicans. So we've got to have a greater focus on protecting the integrity of our electoral process. People deserve to know that their vote's not going to be canceled out by an illegal vote. People deserve the opportunity to go to work. If they want to go to work, we ought to give them that opportunity. We ought to try to get the government out of their way. And we can do that. So finally, I'm going to close by telling you why I think I'm your best choice in the primary on May 22nd. Got 5 Republicans in this race as of today. Somebody may have announced while I was getting over here this afternoon, but there are 5 right now. Out of those 5, I'm the only one who has practiced election law. I've filed an election contest. I've handled ballot access issues. I'm not going to need on-the-job training when I walk into the office to handle what the left is going to throw at us. I also, for those of you that know me, some of you don't, in the last 7 years, if I've proven one thing, it is that I am not afraid of an uncomfortable conversation. I am not afraid of the left or the media throwing names at me or trying to smear me if it means continuing down the path of doing the right thing. You're going to have a Secretary of State that's going to be under enormous pressure because November of 2020, when Donald Trump's on the ballot for re-election, the left spent $30 million, filed multiple lawsuits to try to flip 1 congressional seat in this state this past summer. Imagine what they will try to do to move those 16 electoral votes. You need somebody who's going to stand firm, who you don't have to worry about going wobbly when that kind of pressure comes. And I would submit to you, I am that candidate. The second reason is this. The most prominent Democrat on the statewide ballot next November is not going to be the candidate for governor or lieutenant governor. It's going to be former Congressman John Barrow, who will be the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State. The Democrats, New York, Los Angeles, they're going to spend millions of dollars to try to capture the Secretary of State's position. Because if they get it, that person will start defaulting on these lawsuits. We'll see same-day registration in Georgia. We will see things that totally destroy the integrity of our electoral process because Democrats cannot win a fair statewide election in Georgia right now. They simply can't. And I'm not promising you to be a partisan Secretary of State. What I'm promising you is to be a fair Secretary of State and somebody that's going to ensure that we have a fair election. But John Barrow's been elected in districts designed to elect Republicans. He is a very smooth operator, okay? You don't want to send someone to stand on that debate stage with him who is debating these issues for the first time or who is debating issues with the left on a big stage for the first time. You want someone who can communicate these issues clearly and who can prosecute the case against Congressman Barrow. And I would submit to you, I am that candidate. So I'd appreciate your vote on May 22nd. I would appreciate your support in this campaign. volunteer, sign up with us, help us get the word out. It's a big state. We're trying to introduce these ideas to a lot of folks. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. If there's still time, I'd love to answer some questions. Yes, sir.
This past election, again, Fulton, DeKalb County came in after midnight. And surprisingly, Fulton County didn't have issues with their voting thing, as far as I hear. It's a continued process with them. It's every election, something, miscounted or something happens. I mean, where does it stop with them?
Well, I think the next Secretary of State needs to be going
Have your
into...
attention, please. The library will be closing in 10 minutes. Please take your selections to the circulation desk at this time. Our computers will shut down automatically, so please print or save documents now. Thank you.
You need a Secretary of State who's going to take an aggressive approach. To counties that are routinely reporting late, we need to have audits of their process. We need to have people from the Secretary of State's office in the room when tabulation is going on. There's got to be a reason, because there are large counties. When you compare Fulton and Cobb, you've got a large turnout. You've got a lot of votes to process. One county is able to do it 2 or 3 hours earlier than the other one. Clearly there's something wrong with the process. And so I think that the Secretary of State needs to exercise his oversight function to deal with that. And I think that we can deal with it if we have the will to do that. And accept the fact that, yes, there'll be some criticism about, oh, you're sending these people in to look at this stuff. But that's the only way you can solve these problems, is figure out what's happening in the room. Yes, ma'am.
This is a really basic question, but will there be is the Secretary of State is not a nonpartisan, 2 questions. Is it a partisan position, and also is there a primary?
So great question. Yes, there's a primary. Yes, it's a partisan office. There are 5 Republicans running on the Republican side. There are 3 Democrats that I'm aware of. I fully expect John Barrow to win the Democratic primary. Because we have a 5-way primary, one of the reasons this race is so important, we really need to have this race over with on May 22nd. If we have a runoff and we go until July 24th, then whoever emerges from that runoff, I believe it will be me, but whoever emerges from that runoff is going to be flat broke from a campaign standpoint, and they're going to have to be starting over again with a brand new campaign against an opponent with millions of dollars at his disposal. So it is incredibly important for Republicans to unite around somebody who's committed to these ideas of getting government out of the way in terms of licensing, making it easier for people to go to work, and the integrity of our electoral process. And you need somebody that, anybody can stand up here and tell y'all, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You can look at the last 7 years I've been in the legislature and match up what I've said to what I've done. So to answer your question, though, yes, there will be a primary, May 22nd, and there are 5 of us running. Yes, sir.
Josh, you want to comment on the...
Yes, sir. Of course, you and I have discussed this a couple of times. I am very supportive of trying to move these projects. I agree with you wholeheartedly about the congestion issues around 285, and find it particularly appealing, the idea of being able to take truck traffic off of that corridor and rerouting it. You and I also discussed earlier, and I'll tell y'all, Hunter kind of referenced this a little bit. There's a proposed project between Macon and LaGrange that's referred to as the Export-Import Highway that would 4-lane existing state roads between Macon and LaGrange. And what it would do is it would allow truck traffic to go, for example, from Savannah down 16 over to Highway 27, which is not represented on this map, but you can almost think of it as a parallel to 441 there, where it runs northbound well outside of the 285 perimeter, eventually linking up to Rome and points north. But it would also allow truck traffic to get on 85 in LaGrange and move to Montgomery and points west, all without having to go through Atlanta to get there. So we need to be pursuing those projects. We need to find the funding necessary to do it, because this is an untenable situation, as you pointed out. Yes, sir.
Just to end the thought on that, we hire the guys that fixed our bridge. We can get that thing done in about 60 days.
Yeah, if we waive all those regulations.
My question is this: when we have runoffs about the Karen Handel race. And we've got 15 Republicans running and 1 Democrat. It's going to always create the issue that you just described. But why can't we just have a Democrat primary for that particular seat and a Republican primary for that particular seat, and then let them go at it?
So I'm glad you brought that up. If you're interested in that, I have pre-filed a bill called Senate Bill 309 that would do exactly that. It would establish party primaries in those special elections created by resignations or vacancies for other reasons. In the seat that Senator Hill vacated, instead of having 2 Democrats advance to the runoff, which happened last Tuesday, even though a majority of voters in the first round voted for Republican candidates, that would make sure never again is the majority disenfranchised in that way. So I'm hoping that we can get a lot of support for 309 going forward. Yes, sir.
Josh, 6 months ago, I asked the Secretary of State's office in Macon for applications for plumbing, electrical, heating, and air conditioning. I don't have them yet. They said I could get them on the internet. I said, I'm not hooked up on the internet. Would you mail them to me? I ain't seen them yet. I don't think I'm gonna see them. That is a terrible burden, having all that stuff down in Macon. And the bulk of the licenses are up here. Besides that, they're not responsive. That guy who's running the Secretary of State now, God help us if he gets to be governor, if that's the best he can do.
Well, I can tell you, you're not the first person to say they're having what I'll just categorize as customer service issues with parts of the office. And what I'm committed to doing, I think that everybody's experience with the Secretary of State's office, whether you're getting or renewing a license, whether you're starting a business and need a corporate filing done, which I did for a client today, your experience with the Secretary of State's office should be excellent and brief so you can get back to work. It is ridiculous that if you made that request that it was not honored and honored very quickly. And I can assure you, if I'm elected, we are going to do everything we can to make that office run the way you would expect people, when somebody walks into my law office, I want to serve that person. I want to serve that person in an efficient manner and do a good job for them. We ought to have the same approach in the Secretary of State's office.
Some of that operation be moved up here. I mean, it's just isolated.
Yeah, I'm sure there could be some discussion about, where the various pieces of the office go, but really, regardless of where that's located, if you pick up the telephone and call and say, I want a license application, then it ought to be put in the mail to you. I mean, that's inexcusable in my opinion. Yes, sir.
One quick thing. I noticed in the 16 election, and I've heard this over several other major elections, is that, a lot of people go to the Secretary of State to get updates on the race, but sometimes it freezes and you don't see it for 30 to an hour updated. I mean, don't you think, here is a major race, statewide races, and everybody, of course we have to wait for the catapultum to come in after midnight still, but wouldn't you think they would have major people making sure it doesn't freeze up and have continuous updates on totals?
When we go through the technology upgrade that is going to need to occur because of the machines, I believe what we will need to do at that time is work on the public portal so that we don't have the kind of problems you're talking about. Other states don't have these problems. If you look at our neighbors routinely on election night, check, now that I say this, there'll probably be a big problem, but tomorrow night, there's an election in Alabama. Go on their Secretary of State's website and see, how the results come in. Generally, it's in a pretty orderly fashion. So what we need to do, like what we need to do in a lot of the different aspects of the office, is we need to systematically review, we need to figure out what the choke points are, and then we need to fix them. And so that's certainly my intention once I get into the office. We're going to bring in a team of very competent professional people that I believe can solve those issues. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. You kind of mentioned it when you were speaking about same-day registration and voting. What do you think, at least for early voting, like let's say a couple of weeks before the election day, allowing somebody who got to let him show you his American passport, let him register and vote at the same time? I mean, requirements for documentation should not change, but wouldn't that help more people register at the same time vote? Maybe they don't have time to vote during the election day, but just for early voting purposes only?
So the current law is, for example, there was an
Have
election.
your attention, please. The library is now closed. We will reopen tomorrow at 10 a.m. The library is now closed.
I'll wrap up real quick. We had an election on December 5th, special election. So if you register by November the 4th, then you're allowed to participate in that election. Now, when you think about it, it's even shorter than 30 days because when you back up the early voting, it's really maybe a 14-day blackout period. And there's an important reason for that because it takes time to validate and verify registrations that come in. That's why same-day registration is such a mistake. Now, what I will tell you, and my commitment as Secretary of State, I've talked a lot about illegal voting and trying to prevent that. The flip side to that is voter access. And I am all about having seminars on ways to avoid being turned away from the polls, additional public awareness to make sure people get registered to vote. We make it incredibly easy to register. You can register online, you can register with a postcard, lots of different choices. So I'm going to wrap up there so I don't get arrested. Good night.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Can we vote Stone like we do it in Clarkson